Alright, so today what we want to do is go over kind of the basics of life insurance. So keep in mind we discussed a couple of things about life insurance, about how it stands out compared to, let's say, property casualty insurance. One of those ways is that these are mostly value policies, meaning that we know how much is going to be paid out upon a loss. In this case, the loss is due to a premature death. Whereas the property casualty insurance contract, we wouldn't know the payout until after the fact, and even then there could be some time to adjust those losses based on market value or needs of the customer. Another way that life insurance policies vary, or really life insurance companies vary, is a little bit in their investment side. So their investment strategies can tend to be a little bit longer term when compared to property casualty insurers. But today what we're going to kind of shift gears and focus on is really just the basics of what is life insurance. Why do people purchase it? Why should they purchase it? And then the variations of types of life insurance. What can individuals purchase? Okay. All right. So first, why would you want to purchase in life insurance, right? So the first thing is we want to think about is like really what you're covering here is premature death. So go back to think about when we discussed risk in the past, and we said it's not just uncertainty, right? It's the uncertainty that a loss may occur. So the uncertainty here is when that death is going to happen, right? So we kind of define this as death of a family member that has some income. But we'll see that if there's a family member that doesn't have income, there still could be a need for life insurance as well. But traditionally we think of the income that we're going to lose, so the financial cost of a premature death, the cost. Now, it's kind of peculiar to think about this because there's really this decrease or declining problem of premature death. In most developed nations, we're seeing life expectancies continue to kind of tick up. Now, we could flip the roles and say, well, that creates a new problem, right? Instead of premature death being the risk, now we have what's known as longevity risk. So we worry about, for annuity markets, or retirement plans, which is probably a little more applicable to most individuals. Retirement plans would then have to be more important, right? Because people are living longer. But let's go back to life insurance for now. So the economic justification kind of varies based on the needs of the household. So this next slide here has a couple of examples. I'm going to just kind of briefly move down this list, and really when moving down this list, the need for life insurance tends to increase for the most part. So when we look at single people with very, very little debt, let's say, and no dependents, the need for life insurance is relatively low. That's not to say that if your employer offers a plan, and you have to opt into it, then it's not saying it's necessarily a bad deal. It's just right now it's not ideal. Okay. Now, single parent families, it shifts, right? Because you're the primary breadwinner if you're the single mom or the single dad, and then you have children that are very much dependent on you at least until the age of 18. So your need bumps up significantly there. And it can even increase post their age of 18, right? They could be going to college like you guys are now, and that can be quite expensive. Now, two income earners, there is another dynamic there, right? So if you lose one income, right, is the current income enough to float on that? The answer is almost, usually no, it's not. So now you have even more dependents kind of thrown in the mix, even if there are two income earners. Now, traditional families here, this is kind of your old school view of things, and there's a link here if you want to look at the estimates, what it would cost for a stay-at-home parent. So a traditional family here, again, it's kind of old school, a bit outmoded at this time. It would simply just be there's one breadwinner and then one stay-at-home parent. And, that stay-at-home parent is still providing a value, financial value, and of course more value than just financially. But the financial value being provided could be we could start with saying, all right, well, how much is going to cost to put the children in daycare? Who's going to take time to take them back and forth to school if they're not in daycare, right? So there's still financial losses, even if there's not income coming from that spouse that doesn't work. There's still financial losses if something were to happen to them. So life insurance is going to be important, even for non-income earners in the household, especially if it's a stay-at-home parent. Now, with blended families, this would be more like stepchildren, stepfathers, stepmothers, right? That just means you have more dependents, right? You have your children, then you have stepchildren, okay? And then with sandwich families, this kind of gets into a little bit of that longevity risk as well. Let's say that you're taking care of an older family member, a mother or a father. You're taking care of them, so a sandwich family kind of means like we've kind of flip-flopped here. You might have to worry about their long-term care needs if something happens to you. And long-term care is quite expensive, especially in the later stages of life, right? So we see a lot of kind of room for variation in needs for life insurance as we move through these kind of ideas of what a financial impact would be. Okay. Well, then the next question that we might ask ourselves is how much life insurance should I purchase, right? Or should someone purchase? And there are a few ways we can assess that. And as always, the answer tends to be, well, it depends. Okay. All right, so one is we can basically just use the time value of money to help us out. So in your intro finance courses, if you've had them, right, you understand that a dollar today is not worth the same amount as a dollar in the future, right? You'd rather have a dollar today than wait and get a dollar in the future. So using some discount rates and net present value calculations, we can assess the value of a human life here. Now, again, this is a financial value. That's all we're really concerned with. We're completely eschewing any notion of spirit or soul here. We're just looking for the financial value. All right, so what we would do here is we would come up with an appropriate discount rate. And again, so for this course, I'm not assuming that you have, taken the intro to finance classes, so I will be providing you with all the information. So basically, we get a discount factor. How much is a dollar going to be worth? A dollar now, how much would it be worth 20 years from now or 30 years from now when I no longer need life insurance? I will give you that information. So basically we're saying, what are we missing out? Okay, if this breadwinner, this income earner passes away, what are their future earnings, right? Because you're not just missing out. Let's say you make $50,000 a year, you pass away, your husband or wife or your kids, whatever, they're not going to just need $50,000. That's not going to cut it because you're going to be making that and presumably a little bit more in the future. Okay, so it really does hinge on the importance of this discount rate. So a quick example here, we use Richard, 27 years old, married, has 2 kids, makes $50,000 a year. We'll consider that gross. Then after taxes, his net is $30,000. We have not included rather his personal expenditures, right? Because what we're trying to do here is see what's going to be missing after the fact and what we're going to have to cover. Well, if he passes away, we will not need to pay for his insurance or his personal needs, right? Because that is no longer an expense that exists, unfortunately, because Richard would no longer be with us. So that's a common, kind of misconception here is for someone to take all of their expenses as well. Well, but if you pass away, your expenses are no longer going to be an issue. Your expenses you're going to have to worry about are going to be like estate clearing sales, if you have tax, title, and fees to shift things around. And another thing to keep in mind is, once you pass away, there are burial costs. Okay, but other than that, your costs now are not going to carry over when you pass outside of debt. Okay, so I give you here a present value at 5%, so a dollar, from 27 to 67, so we're moving up here about 40 years. A dollar now be 17, 16, 40 years from now. So the human life value at the net that he brings home would be about $500,000 in life insurance at present time. Okay. And again, I'll give you some worksheets here later on to work through this. And if you have questions, as always, just please let me know. And again, I'm not going to assume that you have this background, so I would be giving you the present value. Okay. Now, the problem that we see here, we're not thinking about other sources of income. So if you're a survivor, you can get some Social Security benefits and incomes. There could be some retirement accounts. Now, of course, you'd want to roll that over, and usually the spouse is the first beneficiary. And it shifts without their consent if it's an IRA or Roth IRA, whereas 401ks behave a bit differently. Occupations, we don't really consider that. We also didn't say, hey, maybe Richard's going to make more money in the future, which most people tend to make more money up to a certain point and then maybe a slight decline close to retirement age. Okay, and also the needs can quickly change, and we didn't even look at needs here. Okay, and then finally that discount rate is quite critical. So another way, I mentioned needs, is the simple needs approach. So say, all right, well, what are we really going to need? We're going to assess, And I mentioned the estate clearance fund here. Income during the readjustment period, sometimes that's higher because there are a lot of shocks initially, when there's a premature death or an accidental death. Life income to the survivors, this might not necessarily be the spouse, then their retirement needs, okay, if it may change, right? And then any special needs. So, and this could be something like, all right, well, I had a 529 plan for my kids, and I want to make sure that they're able to save for their education, right? So that's another need that we definitely want to keep in mind. You would take all these, assess them, and not to say that you would completely go around using discounted rates, expected returns on the retirement account. Right? Those are all good things to do, but the needs approach is more kind of focusing first on what the needs are going to be for the spouse, the survivors, and things like that, and try to attribute a financial value to those. Okay. Then finally, we have a capital retention approach. So retention approach, excuse me. So this is really just say, all right, how much do we need to kind of keep our same level of wealth? So it's almost kind of think of like a retirement plan, except that you're going to pass away instead of have the retirement plan. So this requires looking at personal balance sheet, assets, liabilities, and to determine what the income producing capital may be. Retirement plans tend to be the go-to for that. If you have some investment properties and real estate, that factors in as well. And then look at the net. Okay, see what you have now, see the income you have now, and we can think of this as a type of passive income. All right, what do you have now, and what will the life insurance policy have to fill in? What gaps will that have to fill in once you pass away? So this isn't talking about the money that you're making now as the main income earner, right? This is not part of your job. This is the net of your assets and liabilities is another way to think about this, okay? All right, so what types of insurance policies can we buy? So we're really just going to go over term and whole life here. I've kind of truncated the end of this since we have more online and through your back assignments and discussing each of these. But basically we're just going to look at term and whole life insurance. We're not going to go through all the variations of whole life insurance, and really whole life insurance is one of those products that's definitely sold and not bought. Okay. All right, but term insurance works very similar in a very similar manner to our traditional types of insurance plans that we think about. We pay a premium. Okay, we have a protection period of coverage. After that coverage, it's all done with. Okay. Most of these policies are renewable, right? If you can walk in to see your agent, or I guess you're not going to walk in during a pandemic. If you're going to call your agent, the fact that you can call him means that you have probably not suffered a loss. You're alive, you're with us, you're not a ghost, so we're going to renew it, right? You haven't suffered a loss. Okay, think about the evidence of insurability here. We go back a few chapters. Most of them can be converted if you want to roll it into a whole life policy. It's up to the individual to decide if that's really a good choice for them. And this last point here would seem pretty weird if we were talking about any other, auto policy or health insurance policy. It seemed pretty bizarre to say, okay, there's no cash value or savings element to this contract. That seems pretty bizarre to say, but the reason we say that is because whole life insurance oftentimes, and really universal type insurance, has a cash value or a savings element, and that's how it kind of stands out. Okay. So types of term insurance, you can see up to 30-year term insurance. So if you buy 30-year term insurance at the age of 27, it's good until you're 57, provided you're paying those premiums, right? If you don't pay the premiums, then there's a time that you can reinstate it, and then there's a time that it's lapsed, but you can also reinstate it. But after a certain amount, usually 1 to 2, or usually 90 days, you have to go through everything again and show some evidence of insurability. You can even get a term up to specific ages, so term to 65. You can get a decreasing term, which means that as you age, the amount that this policy pays out decreases. So it may start at $200,000 and then slow, let's say a straight line, depreciates down to $100,000. And you might think, well, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. But really, oftentimes what we see is people's needs for life insurance will decrease. So there's a huge spike, generally speaking, when someone gets married or has kids, right? You have more dependents. So there's a huge spike up to that. And then 20 years down the road, the kids are no longer really kids because now they're 20, and their need, the need to take care of a 20-year-old, they tend to be less expensive. Again, we're just ignoring the fact that maybe maybe the parents taking on some of the student loans for them, or has a 529 plan, but essentially the needs tend to decrease. And then once the kids are 30, 40 years old, barring any extreme extenuating circumstances, you don't need it as much, right? You don't need that protection as much. You have less to pay for should you pass away. Also, your debts tend to decrease as well. So it's kind of a decreasing term. That's the idea that we think about that. Re-entry means that you can just re-enter, okay, at any time during the policy period should it lapse. Now, return of premium term insurance means that at the end of the term, you get all your premiums back. Okay, so that sounds nice. Now, granted, usually the rates here are going to be a little bit higher, right? Because you're getting the money back, right? And you might think, well, why are they doing this? Well, keep in mind they're earning these premiums over the protection period, so they can invest those premiums, and they're expecting that, hey, at the end of it, even if they pay you all the premiums back, due to their investment and in whatever it may be, they're getting more back than paid in the premiums. Okay. Now, uses of term insurance, I would generally say that term insurance is going to be what you want to focus on. Whole life and universal life had its time back in the 80s, maybe the 90s, when there were more notable tax advantages, especially for high income earners. But right now, term insurance is kind of where it's at as far as actual value is concerned. Now, this is heuristic. It's rule of thumb. It's kind of a broad statement, so it's not always true. But for the most part, term insurance is going to be kind of where one would start if they're wanting an insurance policy. So if you just need a limited amount of income, so it's cheaper. Term policies are cheaper, with the exception of return of premium term policies. They're a little bit more expensive. The protection you need is temporary, right? Because a whole life insurance, as the name entails, is for kind of your entire life, and there's savings elements to it as well. But you can also use it to guarantee future insurability should you want to roll it over into a whole life policy. Okay. Now, limits here. So if you do wait, or if you don't have a reentry of term, compared to Richard in the previous example at 27, if he gets a term policy for 10 years, 27 to 37, and then he gets another policy at the age of, let's say, 40, obviously it's going to be a lot more expensive. Okay, why? Well, because he's closer to the exposure of death. He's closer to death as he ages. You march closer to death every day, unfortunately. Okay, so this isn't really also a good way to save for money. That being said, if you're using any life insurance policy as a savings vehicle, then I'm hoping you just ran out of things to do with your money. There are far better savings vehicles and savings elements contracts than whole life policies. CD rates even could be better, right? Because you need to think about this as more of a coverage thing. So if anyone's trying to sell you a whole life policy, it's probably because they're getting a really nice commission on it. Okay. So speaking of whole life insurance, just a little quick tidbit here, and we'll go over this a little bit in later chapters as well. But whole life policies are cash value policies, so there's a cash value that's attributed to them. You're paying in, there's some earned cash value in there. And we kind of call it, one type is ordinary life insurance. So for your whole life here actually only means up until age 121. So if you're 122 years old, then you get the value of that policy. It's payable to you, not your beneficiaries. The life insurance company is like, look, man, you win. Here you go. You're now the oldest person that's ever lived, so here's the value of it. Now, of course, that doesn't happen. 99.999% of people pass away before the age of 21. So it's lifetime protection. The asterisk here is your lifetime is up to 121 years. The premiums here are level. So the premiums you pay, let's say if it's Richard at 27, he gets a whole life policy. He pays the same premium at the age of 27 as he does when he's 77 or 117. Okay, he's paying the entire amount of the policy. So what that means is initially Okay, based on your risk, you're kind of overpaying for the risk charge because you're not as risky at 27. You know, it's not as likely that someone who's 27 is going to pass away compared to someone who is 77, even conditioned on the fact they've already made it that far, right? So ignore even with conditional probabilities. Okay, so that means it's used, after the fact, let's say at a halfway point, and there's some tables we can look at to see this. At a certain point, you're actually paying, kind of less than your total risk profile would suggest, right? So if it's $100 premium when you're 27, and it's also $100 premium when you're 77, but your risk has continually increased, then you're kind of underpaying at the end of it while overpaying at the beginning of it. Okay? All right. Now, other things to keep in mind with whole life insurance. So there's this kind of net amount of risk. This doesn't really harken back to the unearned and earned premiums, but it's not too dissimilar from that. So this is the difference between what we talked about, the legal reserve, and the face value of the insurance. So the face amount is what will be paid out when the beneficiary, or excuse me, when the insured passes away. Now, of course, this decreases with policy age because they're paying more into it. Now, cash surrender values, this does change a little bit state to state on what has to be surrendered as cash value. Because again, we have these insurers that are paying into this policy. There's a quote unquote savings element. Again, you shouldn't be using this as a savings vehicle unless you just don't know what to do with your money. But there's a savings element to it. Okay, but this is not the same thing as a legal reserve. Okay, so when would you want to use whole or ordinary lifetime insurance? Well, one, when you just want protection until whenever. If you think you're going to need that lifetime protection, then this is a better option for the most part, right? So compared to a 30-year term, which is probably on the higher end of the amount, the term insurance that you can get, or even term up to 65, you're not going to get full lifetime coverage with that. By the namesake, it's a term policy. There's a limited term. Again, it says, used to save money. Look at that as something that's ancillary, right? Just keep it on your periphery and say, all right, well, great, I can save some money with this, but that should not be the main reason you're getting a whole life policy, to save money. Okay, and now the limitation is that even with this, because it is a little bit more expensive, because it's more, it's stretched over a longer period of time, there's some cash value to it. People who purchase whole life insurance tend to be underinsured just from the risk perspective of things. Okay, so that's one thing we need to keep in mind. Okay, and that's it for whole life insurance. We've cut off the variations of whole life. We're going to save that for a later time. So if you have any questions, as always, let me know. Reach out to me. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.